Welcome to today's episode. I'm Batman, your guide through the shadows of technology and innovation. Tonight, we're joined by Andy Murray from the Major Project Association. Together, we'll delve into the pressing issues at the forefront of our industry. We'll explore whether ChatGPT poses a real challenge to Google's dominance in search and scrutinize the property technology sector. Are we truly innovating? Stay with us as we uncover these big stories.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Project Flux podcast on this very sunny spring day. It's a pleasure to have Yoshi back with us after his escapades to Sweden last week. And we also have the pleasure of having Andy Murray from the Major Project Association on the podcast. Welcome, Andy, and we'll have some time with you in a bit.
Great, thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. So before we crack on with the podcast today, hopefully the newsletter's landed in a lot of your inboxes. If it hasn't, please don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you do get the newsletter every Monday morning. There is a lot of information to take in the world of AI and project delivery and AI generally. And what we try and do is condense that down into a very, very quick read that you can get up to speed in about 5 minutes. So, and one more announcement to make before we move on to having a good chat with Andy is around the Project Data Analytics Task Force meetup. The next meetup is on the 15th of May, a Wednesday night, and it's at the Gleeds offices. It starts at 6 p.m. The last one we had was extremely successful. We had Karina Singh from the IPA. And this time, and we are going to touch on it in a bit more detail, we're going to talk about whether it's a threat or a saviour to the project delivery workforce. So let's move on to our interview with Andy Murray. Andy, it's really is a pleasure to have you here, and it's great to have been working with you over the last few months in the Project Data Analytics Task Force. I've got to know you and all the fantastic stuff you're doing. Could you just tell us all a little bit about yourself and your role at the Project Data Analytics Task Force and the Major Projects Association?
Great, yes, thanks, James. So I've been involved in projects right since the beginning of my career, initially with a tech firm working on technology deployment in telecom sector. So transatlantic telecoms cables, fiber optics was my thing when I graduated. And then I've since worked in a variety of types of projects, from construction to business change, transformation, regeneration, policy deployment. So I've seen a real variety and in different types of organizations as well, in different sectors. And 5 years ago, or coming up to 4 years ago, I joined the Major Projects Association as the executive director. And that was really a continuation of quite a lot of things I've been doing in addition to my sort of salaried role, really about bringing people together so that we can learn from each other, in addition to the sort of commercial relationships that may exist. And that's really the purpose of the Major Projects Association, which is thinking about major projects aren't delivered by a single organization, requires multiple organizations to come together that are very different in terms of the types of organizations that need to work together and the number of disciplines that need to work together as well. So the Major Projects Association is a membership organization. Our members are those organizations involved in major projects, and my role really is to serve the members, but fundamentally that means bringing these organizations together to connect people, provide a platform to share ideas and experience, and ultimately to advance the practice of delivering major projects.
Yeah, and it sounds fantastic. And I think the fact that you said at the beginning there that it kind of was born out of a labour of love, by actually trying to bring people together and trying to provide an improvement. Because when you talk about major projects, it's not just construction projects, right? It's all kinds of.
That's right. I mean, there's if you sort of follow the money, so to speak, a high proportion of the major projects that's discussed or debated or reviewed within the Major Projects Association tends to be infrastructure. But if you look at the government's major project portfolio, infrastructure is one of 5 different portfolios, others being, for example, like technology and telecoms or defence transformation, and it's not the largest one. So that you're very right to point out, it's not just about construction or infrastructure. There are lots of different types of major projects too.
Yeah, and AI, when we talk about AI and data-driven project delivery, that touches all industry. And that's one of the things that I found fascinating in the kind of research that I do, is that it doesn't matter who you talk to, what industry you talk to, it's affecting everybody. And it's an opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to improve some of the statistics that come out of major project delivery.
That's right. And, I like here to really make a distinction between project management and project work. And things that might be unique to construction versus, say, software development, versus other types of projects, will be the innovations that are being applied through AI and data analytics on project work. But the common bit is project management, and that's nearly universal. And so that's where we can learn from different types of projects and apply, learning from, say, construction, and apply that in, say, regeneration or policy deployment. Because project management, the process of overseeing the project work, is generally universal.
So, with all that and the fact that you're overseeing this organisation that's trying to bring people together, you've also got this involvement in the Project Data Analytics Task Force, which I'm lucky enough to sit on with you, Andy. How is that, working hand in hand with the Major Projects Association, and what do you see as the real benefit and the kind of opportunities that the Project Data Analytics Task Force is bringing to the industry?
Well, the task force is similar in many respects to the Major Projects Association, that is bringing together different communities. And what I really like about the task force, when I was first sort of got involved at the outset, when Martin Paver was describing sort of the mission that he was on for this sort of data-driven approach to projects, is that it's about sort of bringing together the minds of project professionals with data professionals. And there's 2 aspects that we've been looking at. One is around how can we improve, if you like, the data literacy and the capability of the project professionals, but at the same time, how can we make the world of projects more attractive to those who are working in data science in particular. And part of that, if you think about where we see data analytics and AI being applied, it's mostly in domains that are highly repetitive or routine. So we've seen it in retail, we've seen it in customer services, we're seeing it in manufacturing, in banking, and the world of projects has been really slow in the uptake of data analytics, and it's partly because the data scientists and the data professionals have been attracted to work elsewhere. So that's something that the task force has been looking at, and it came off the back of a white paper in 2020, which sort of set out a vision of what project management could look like, by adopting data analytics more systematically and more in a more considered way, and that coincided with the APM's Golden Thread report, the 2019 Golden Thread report that was published, that said that project management was worth 170 billion to the global economy. And at the same time, Ben Fluberg published his report, which was looking at something like 11,000 or so projects that concluded only 0.5% of major projects delivered on all of their time, cost, schedule,
1 in 200.
and importantly, the benefits that sought. So that 1 in 200, and when you apply that to that 170 billion in terms of what project management is worth, it shows you the upside that can be gained. Now, it's not, given that we're talking about data and sort of the numeracy of it, that's not a 0-1 position. It's not a case of a failed project delivers no value. So obviously it's a scale, but it just goes to show that there is significant improvements that can be gained by applying data analytics in particular to project management. work, and that distinction I was making between project work and project management as well. And I've always regarded projects or project management on projects as an experiment. And if it wasn't an experiment, we would know how to do it in the same way that most medical treatment is done under conditions of experimentation. And if you think about if you were to go and have a procedure, in a hospital, depending upon what that procedure is, you may well have to sign a disclaimer to say this is being done as a part of research, and you sign a waiver to say that the results of your procedure can be used to inform future procedures as a part of that ongoing learning for
Every
the medical
operation is a one-off,
professions.
isn't it? Effectively, even
Yeah,
if it's a repeat, it's your individual circumstances, your individual, and it's a bit like a
exactly. And I would love to see every project manager have to sign a waiver to say that the method that they're applying, on their project, is an experiment,
yeah.
and it's done under experimentation conditions, and therefore we need to collect the data and we need to make that available for ongoing update and improvement to the methods that are being deployed. And if we have that mindset, I think that would really help us advance the practice of project management, because we want to get better. Otherwise, that 1 in 200 is going to hang around.
Yeah, I'd love to see that coming and
for
getting
too
them
long.
to sign waivers. That would be interesting for sure. But I think the biggest testament to the work that the task force has done was the paper that came from the IPA that we talked about a few weeks ago in the podcast, that effectively endorses, if it doesn't mandate, but massively endorses the use of data analytics and AI in project delivery. And I think that can be seen as a huge success of the task force, who kind of led the way in that, as you said, since 2020. So fantastic. I think you had the question, Yoshi.
Yeah, this kind of touches on that cross collaboration. So, Andy, you've been immersed into the way different associations have approached digital and data and projects. So, for instance, the MPA with yourself, APM, the PMI, and other associations. What differences have you noticed between the associations in terms of how they've approached the data enablement within projects, if any?
Yeah, so that they're all grappling with, how can we best apply it? Can we cut through the myths from the reality? And I guess there's a bit of fear that by the time we sort of capture what good practice looks like, to include that, say, in a body of knowledge, that it's already then out of date by the time it gets published. So there's that challenge as well, and particular for those professional bodies where they do provide that body of knowledge, and then the certification schemes that then provide the basis of learning and development. Now, I'm sort of lucky, with the Major Projects Association, because we don't have a body of knowledge. We're not a professional institution in that way. So, so we can, if you like, encourage people to experiment and to consider how to best apply the opportunities that are there for their projects. So I think quite rightly there's been a case of we need to find out more, and the APM, for example, in collaboration with the task force and with the Major Projects Association, commissioned some research that was undertaken by Warwick Manufacturing Group, part of the business school. That was in 2021, and we call that the barriers report, but I can't remember the full title. It's not called the barriers report.
We'll put the link up in the show notes. So
put the link up. So Professor Naomi Brooks oversaw that research, and it was really interesting on that one, because it sort of set out the misunderstanding of what data analytics really was, from even things like descriptive analytics, prescriptive analytics, or the different aspects of how it could be used. But I read it again recently just to remind ourselves how far we've come. And one of the insights that I gained from it was that there was a barrier there around the culture and the apprehension that project leaders have in applying data analytics and, to an extension, AI. And the apprehension is that there was perceived effort that's required to make it work was seen as out of reach. It was massive. So I don't know if it's a view that we all need supercomputers, but I think it was more a case of, the data's really dirty. It's in silos. It sits across organizational boundaries. It's non-standard, and it's just going to be really difficult and challenging to get good quality data that we can all have access to. So there was a view that it's really hard. And then the other sort of apprehension was that because there's few really good examples in the project world at that time compared to other domains, that the perceived benefits weren't as great as, for example, we would imagine, given that we're seeing it in other domains and trying to bring it into the world of projects. And what struck me about that is it's the opposite of is it Hofstadter's rule that, generally speaking, we overestimate the benefits and we underestimate the effort required to do something. So it's what project professionals are often accused of, even if it's part of that strategic misrepresentation, but being over optimistic on one hand and sort of downplaying the task in the other.
Isn't that, that's very strange, isn't it? And maybe that's a lot to do with the culture that we're dealing with, reluctance to change because when it comes to technology. But that's a very interesting.
Well, it's like the classic who likes change, and everyone puts their hand up. Who wants to change? And no one does. So
Yeah.
Just before we go on to the news of the week, I just wanted to ask you. I was in a meeting with you the other week, Andy, and you talked about something called the 4 E's, which I thought were really interesting as a way of summing up the benefits of project data analytics and AI to project delivery. Could you just quickly sort of summarize that for the listeners?
Yeah, and one of the things I've been trying to do, through the Major Projects Association, I have a volunteer role with the APM and also with the task force, is to break down some of those apprehensions of applying AI and data analytics to the world of projects so that we can experiment more broadly and more quickly so that we can improve that 1 in 200 sooner. And before I move on to the 4 E's, the reason why, that 170 billion, is easy to think of it just in that sort of financial terms. But those improvements, to the UK, for example, could mean, another school, another hospital, better transport infrastructure, more care workers that could be deployed and changing people's lives. So this has a real impact. It isn't just a return on investment type calculation. These, have societal benefits too when we can improve project delivery. So one of the things I like to do is to try and sort of break down, the fears and also try to provide sort of the Ross Atkins style explainers for the opportunities. And just reading through case studies and literature in this area, it dawned on me that the focus is principally on the 2 E's that we would know if you do continuous improvement, which is efficiency and effectiveness, and sort of things like productivity and better decision making. And we even see that in our original vision, that the white paper back in 2020 around data-driven projects, and we talk about better decisions and being more productive. But when I'm seeing examples of how AI is being deployed elsewhere, what we're also seeing is enhanced capabilities. And if I just give you a really trivial example, through ChatGPT, I could ask it to produce a limerick, something that I have zero artistic capability of doing. So, James, I know you're a Spurs fan, and I'm an Arsenal fan, and
I still have you on the podcast. So.
and Yoshi, yours too, aren't you? So I forgot about that, Yoshi. So we could talk about being 3-0 up at half time on the most recent North London derby, and I could give it some facts of the first half and say, give me a limerick with these things featured in it, and it will do it. And I could iterate it 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times, and I could pick the best bit, and I could then produce a limerick, something I'm not able to do on my own. Now, I've seen a similar one, not similar, but I've seen another example of what I would call enhanced capability, which is my 3rd E, being able to do things today that we would otherwise not be able to do. And this was someone using a CAD package to design a warehouse using natural language prompts. So just basically saying, build me a warehouse, or sorry, design me a warehouse. And it needs to have these features, for this capacity. It's going to be used for this sort of content. And it did it. And then it was tweaked to say, actually, want it 2 stories, or it needs to have a bigger loading bay, or whatever. But it went through a number of iterations just using natural language prompts. Now, to drive that package typically would take 6 to 7 years of a specialist to learn, all the design rules and so on. And now it could be done through a plain, sorry, not a plain English, but a natural language prompt. It can link to regulations and other design criteria too. And all of a sudden, someone who hasn't got that ability, like I don't have an ability to create a limerick, can now do that work. So it's enabling generalists to do some specialist tasks. That's an enhanced capability. That's going to give us some superpowers that we don't have today. So that's my third E. And the fourth E is examples of where what's the sweet spot for for AI and machine learning. And it's things that are either really repetitive with high volumes of transactions or data, or where we're trying to do some sense making, and the amount of things we want to do sense making for is so massive. Or we can do it, but it will just take us really, really long time in order to do it. And what happens when we start doing those things that are routine and highly repetitive and with lots of data? We become error prone. So the sort of the fourth E is around that error removal as well, and we can get it to check our work and other aspects. So I just really wanted us to think about going beyond just the efficiency and effectiveness, which is a well-trodden path, particularly to do continuous improvement work and innovation work, thinking about what are those new things that we're able to do that we can't currently imagine, and also where can we start using it to remove those errors as well.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And I think, it's bringing down barriers. Like you said, it's allowing people who might not have that creative streak, whatever that may be. You mentioned limericks, but it could easily be also design, to start being able to do those things. Even if it's not the final thing, it'll get the ball moving and start the momentum going. So we're already seeing that happening. That whole natural language kind of prompts, just a way of inputting into effectively a large language model. And I'm pretty sure that's coming down the line from the likes of Autodesk. You mentioned ChatGPT. We're going to go into some of the stories. There's been quite a lot happen again this week. And actually, the first story I want to touch on is what is going to be happening this week, because a lot of the big companies are having announcements. We had Apple's today. Nothing major there in terms of AI, apart from the fact that their new M4 chip for the iPad is heavily AI powered. But we know that OpenAI are also having an announcement at some point this week. And the thing I wanted to talk about, there's heavy rumours that they're going to be introducing basically a ChatGPT search. So something to take on Google, because obviously ChatGPT at the moment is a different entity from Google. You still need to use Google for search. ChatGPT is more something that you converse with and you ask it to produce things. But I'm not sure if you've used something called Perplexity, which is powered by OpenAI, I believe, but this is more like a search feature. So it's where you would go to, instead of going to Google, to search for whatever it may be. How do I, get my TV to work properly, or whatever it may be. And that's the rumor, that ChatGPT and OpenAI are going to release their own version of that. And if that's true, that's going to be going head to head with Google. And bearing in mind, we've already got this kind of arms race happening between the big players, that's going to really hot things up. Just your views on that, Andy. Do you think that's something that you're excited about, or just another piece of news in the ever emerging world of AI?
No, it's excited might be pushing it. Intrigued.
Intrigued, yeah.
Yes, and the intrigue here is just thinking about the dominance that Google's had over searches for getting on for 2 decades, to the extent that if you or I search for something, we will get a list of results, and some of us, might go to page 2, 3, 4, and 5, but most people will scan through and perhaps pick something that that seems what you're looking for on on the first page, maybe second page. But what we're getting from generative AI with OpenAI's ChatGPT is something quite different. It is that conversation, but it's actually pulling lots of sources together to give a unique result, not a repetitive result from a search, a Google style search engine, where you get a list back, and that list is clearly influenced by advertising revenues,
Yeah, it's
and
hard to differentiate.
and the relationship between the advertisers and the platforms over time is sort of become quite static,
Yeah.
sort of sort of stifling innovation, you would say. So I think it's great that Google, that I guess has woken up to that, and that they're being pushed by OpenAI, that will now provide that search. It's
Yeah,
more than
well,
just a search, though, isn't it? It's what you're going to get back.
it is, yeah, and it's well, if it's anything like Perplexity, I don't know. Have you used it, Yoshi, Perplexity yet? Or
I've used it before, yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
because when I first used it, I couldn't understand. I was thinking to myself, what's the difference here between this and ChatGPT? But actually, as I've used it more, I realise they are very different use cases, and when you're actually trying to find how to do something, it's much less error prone to hallucinations. It provides, I think
Yes.
what's really important, it provides sources and sites, where it's getting the information from. So I've got a feeling that's the route it's going to go down. But playing devil's advocate for a minute, and this is for either for you, Andy, or Yoshi, are there any potential downsides or challenges with this kind of rapidly advancing AI technology? I'm thinking particularly of like user privacy and data security.
Yes. So the one thing that springs to mind really is the potential cyber attack on the MOD recently from China.
News, yeah.
So China got a lot of access to a lot of our GDPR data or our PII data, and there's a huge risk associated with that, and that just elevates that fear of putting your own personal information out into the internet or out into these AI models, because you don't know what's being trained, you don't know where attacks might come from. So there is a huge risk of GDPR breaches with that.
And sticking on the ChatGPT feature, because there's another feature that has started rolling out, and we touched on it a couple of weeks ago when they announced it, but it's starting to be rolled out now, is this memory feature. So it started rolling out in the US, and it started rolling out to a few Plus users. And I think this is also something which is to be welcomed, not excited, intrigued, Andy, and scared about in equal measure, because what we're basically saying is this memory feature is going to start recognizing your patterns. So the way that you search for things, it's going to remember, and over time, it's going to become very, very personal. And at what point is it going to start talking, a bit like HAL in 2001, where it really actually remembers a conversation that you had with it maybe 2 years ago? Is this a feature that it should be welcomed, or is it a feature that we should start thinking, wow, this is something that's maybe going a bit too far now, Andy?
I think we should welcome it, but it's interesting in terms of Yoshi pulled up the privacy issue, but one of our rights to be forgotten is how do we exercise that right within that memory feature? But I think generally we should take this progress in a positive way, and again, that distinction between, if we wind it back just one little bit to the search engine discussion, my experimentation with ChatGPT when it was first made available to the general public rather than being a closed platform, as I was demonstrating it to my kids to say this is a game changer, and they couldn't see it. They couldn't see how it was different to Google and other searches. And so the example we had is, well, we got to plan the family holiday. We'd already set that we were going to go somewhere in France, and we knew we had about 4 or 5 days to add on to that, and we wanted to do it somewhere between the ferry port and just sort of south of Paris. And so we were playing with it, and we said, can you recommend what a family of six, 4 children, gave their ages, could do? We want it to be about 3 or 4 hours drive from the ferry port, and then we want to be able to get to our final destination afterwards. And it came up with a couple of recommendations, and then prompted it again, and in the end, each of the children said, actually, I would like this, I would like that, and we put it in. And it came up with a recommendation. We all looked at each other and said, actually, should we book that holiday then? And it was only meant to be sort of just an illustration of the art of the possible. Now, if you come back to the memory bit, if I'm planning a holiday this year or next year, and it remembers, actually, you've got 4 children, it might make a prompt. Actually, one of them's now turned 18. Are they going on holiday with you, or is it just 3 of the children? So that memory I can see being useful. Now, if you put it into your project context, knowing the risks that came up, last period or 3 periods before, or you did a similar project, and you're asking about these things, could this be repeating itself? I think that's
I think that's
nice
the
feature to
interesting
have.
one for me. Yeah, because we always talk about lessons learned and the fact that we don't capture those lessons. Well, actually, you could get to a point where these large language models actually start remembering the lessons as you go, because it's just being built into the memory. So when you move on to the next projects, all that stuff is built into the model itself.
It's worth noting as well, James, within that, there is the option to turn off memory features, because for those who are having shared accounts, so within Teams environments in ChatGPT, you can turn off the feature for single conversations or by default. So it does.
That's good to know. But it does raise the question, if, let's say, an enterprise version of whether it's Google Gemini or any of these, if they've got memory feature, it gets quite interesting, because let's say, I'm training this model working for company A, and I'm providing all this information, and it's creating a company memory. And then when you move to company B, what does that mean? Is that your intellectual property that you're leaving with that company? It raises all these questions that we can't answer yet because we just don't know. But it's the kind of stuff that's been going through my mind. The next news story I want to talk about, sort of going off on a tangent slightly, but there was a big story in the prop tech world around CoStar's acquisition of Matterport. So those who don't know Matterport, they were the guys who did all the scanning, the building scanning hardware, but they recently moved into more of a software kind of spaces under management type approach. So they're definitely seeing the benefit of data utilization and subscription model rather than hardware, although they're still doing the hardware. Anyway, the interesting thing for me was that it looks like there's still a lot of life in the prop tech sector, and I think a lot of this is being powered by AI, because it went for 212% premium over its recent trading price, which is obviously extremely healthy, and it means that I think that the AI features that people are building into software specifically is making a lot of these companies quite attractive. So what does CoStar's acquisition of Matterport tell us about current trends and future directions, I suppose, of the real estate tech market?
Well, it's a hot market. I think that's what it's telling us, firstly, that there's a lot of interest in the capabilities that some of these, if you like, more agile organizations have built up quite quickly. And in this particular case, where they've managed to sort of pivot slightly from their hardware to their software orientation. And I think we're likely to see this elsewhere too.
Yeah, because I think, moving to the software, whether that was deliberate, because they could see what was coming with the AI models, or whether that was a happy accident, it has enabled them to kind of ride on the AI wave and obviously increased their market value. But it does raise another question about how these kind of mixed reality technologies like Matterport are going to transform traditional real estate and construction, because we've talked about it in the past. I think the construction site, for instance, is going to become a very different place over the course of maybe the next 10, 15 years, much more like a manufacturing site when more and more of this work is done off-site. And I think stuff like Matterport and its competitors are just going to sort of promote and speed that up Do you agree with
Yeah.
that, Yoshi?
Yeah, I do agree with it. I think we touched on it with Andrew Knight in a few podcasts back about
Yeah.
pre-manufacturing, parametric
Yeah.
modeling. The real thing that I found interesting with this acquisition was that the valuation was so high considering a period of decline of high value post IPO, right?
Mm.
I mean, that was one big thing. And like you mentioned, James, that shift into from hardware to software is key. And
Mhm.
because Matterport had rich data within commercial buildings, for instance, I think that was a likely driver for the acquisition. So in terms of things like strategic positioning and people who are building startups out there, it's probably wise to look at probably pivoting to software and how you can better manage large volumes of data, because that's where the driver for investors is at the
Yeah.
moment. So
Yes,
PropTech
I
is still
agree.
it's still a viable market,
Mhm.
but it was quite a smart acquisition. We'll see how it plays out.
Well, I think what's going to play out is the fact that they've got these hardware devices that are going to be able to capture an awful lot of data.
That's the bit.
And
It's the data, the
it's
hardware.
the data, exactly. Just playing devil's advocate before we go on to the next story. I mean, this all sounds great, and especially the three of us who are very kind of keen advocates of digitization. Is there a risk that these technologies could lead to an over reliance on digital transaction and overshadow that kind of human element?
Yes.
Um,
Andy, you can go first.
That was a very
no,
clear yes from Yoshi.
yeah, I think it's it. I don't think if you rephrased it, is there a scenario, or used a loaded question? He said, "Is there a danger?" As though it's potentially a bad thing. The Gartner's report that said that 80% of project management tasks, are likely to be AI performed. So that prompts the question: what's the 20% that remains? And those will be those relationship-based, sense-making, decision-making roles. So that relationship, the interaction will still be there. It will just be focusing on the things that really matter rather than some of the transactional activities that take place in a project.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this can only be a good thing, as we've spoken about before. Taking the humans away from dangerous situations is only a good thing. As I guess as long as we don't hand off control to the big tech companies. That's the one thing I always worrying about with digital transformation. It's making sure that we're keeping sort of control of our own industry. And I think, that's why it's so important, the work you're doing with the MPA, Project Data Analytics Task Force, and all the institutions, making sure that we don't have a blockbuster moment where we kind of hand off control. So that's my only caveat, even though I'm a big advocate of it. The next story, I just want to play a little clip, right? We put this in the newsletter, and Yoshi, you brought this to my attention, but it was really, really interesting. I'm going to quickly share my screen and just have a listen to this, and then we can talk about it.
ChatGPT is not phenomenal. Like, ChatGPT is like mildly embarrassing at best. GPT-4 is the dumbest model any of you will ever have to use again by a lot. But it's like important to ship early and often, and we believe in iterative deployment.
So that's Sam Altman from OpenAI, and what do you make of that? Who wants to go first?
There's a lot to unpack here, but again, I'll let Andy go first.
It was a promo for what's coming next.
Yes, absolutely.
If the current sort of star platform is the dumbest thing we're ever going to have to use again, so the implication is that the next one will again blow our minds in terms of its capability. So I am excited about that.
Yeah. Oh, that goes from
I've gone from intrigued to excited on that one.
Excited, yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know if you know, there was this weird model that kind of came up on Hugging Face and some of these other sites called GPT-2, and it was only up for about a day, but the performance of it was absolutely spectacular. And then it came down, and everyone thinks that might be ChatGPT 5.
I think GPT-2, the base chatbot, is a fine-tuned version of GPT-2. Now, when you ask a layperson, why would GPT-2 be competing with GPT-4? it's because it's effectively fine-tuning on steroids, and they're managing to do it with parameters of only 1.5 billion in comparison to like almost 200 billion
So
with
it's a smaller
GPT-4.
model. It's a much
It's a
smaller
smaller
model.
model. It's easier and it's cheaper to run. And the interesting thing, James, is that there's actually two models. So I actually managed to try it. So you can
You
actually
did?
still try it online if you go to what's it called, LMSys, which is a website where you can compare different AI model outputs. And if you use the battle mode, it will actually, by surprise, you can look at different outputs. Now, I did look into where GPT-2 was better, and to give you guys an example, have you heard of the mayonnaise test with an AI?
No,
With an
Tom.
AI?
I'm going to find out now.
So the mayonnaise test is basically where you prompt a model and you ask it how many times does the letter N appear in the word mayonnaise, and where does the N appear in terms of its placement. Now, GPT-4 got that there was two N's in mayonnaise. Now I think there's two N's in mayonnaise, right? But it got the wrong place. Claude Opus got, I think, mentioned three N's and it was in the wrong place. But GPT-2 based chatbot got it right with a more methodical approach to learning. So despite it being much smaller in parameters, which means it should effectively be weaker, it performed very well because it's been fine-tuned very effectively.
So do you think that this is basically what they're working on, or do you think this is just something else?
No, it's something else. I think Sam Altman denied it, but the interesting thing is that there's actually two models. So there's two models. It's called, one is GPT-2, I'm good, and GPT-2, I'm also good. So they're testing these different models. And I think it's a way to drive down the cost of running LLMs.
Yeah, and they're leaking them on purpose, aren't they? Just to get some public sort of response to them and find out what they're like. But it is exciting. You know, I think the game changer that GPT-4 has been, if GPT-5 is the same jump up again, I think it's going to it's going to change the game.
And it will be.
Little less than a year after the last one.
And Sam's very confident, right? I think in the video, he mentioned that it will be generally smarter to a higher degree of scientific certainty, right? So he's sure that GPT-5 and 6 will be better.
Yeah.
And when they built GPT-4 at the time, they used a technique called predictive scaling. So you don't just spend loads of money in building an AI model. You have these markers to indicate when something is going to be useful for a certain task, right? Yeah. So they had these markers out. So they must be at a level whereby they're near finishing GPT-5. I'm not sure, but
summary is the rumor.
They're certain. In terms of what capability it has, I don't know. But like Sam said, he thinks it will be generally smarter.
Watch this space, as they say. But I thought that clip was a nice, fun clip to watch. Basically, what we're using at the moment is the dumbest thing we'll ever use. So there we go.
It's the dumbest thing we'll ever use.
Right, just one more thing before we wrap up for today. Andy, there's an event, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, on the 15th of May. It's the Project Data Analytics Task Force meetup, and it's all around AI revolution, threat or saver to the project delivery workforce. I think you're going to be there. Do you just want to give everyone a bit of a sneak peek about what we'll be discussing?
Yeah, and is that in the jazz club? Again,
it is in the jazz club. There'll be no jazz music. Or there might be some jazz music on the speakers, but no live jazz bands.
Yeah. So if you've not been to one of these meetups, you need to definitely get down there before we have to move on from the jazz club. So it's a great place to mix with. Again, the last one you did the hands up. How many people here are sort of project oriented? How many people here are data oriented? It was about 50-50 audience, and I really like that mix. Diversity. It's well proven now. Diversity, delivers better performance, and we don't often, think of it in terms of that disciplinary, multidisciplinary diversity. So it's great that we've got very different people and people who are spread in their career stages as well. We're in attendance. So we're now turning the spotlight, from those on the stage to those in the audience in terms of the project workforce. Those people actively working on projects and thinking about what are those opportunities and what could be the risks. And I guess the biggest risk is being left behind.
Yes.
And the risk that investing in skills and in a particular perhaps specialist role that gets overtaken by the capabilities we've just been discussing. So I think there are some risks there. There is an inevitability on some of these things. So the people might be in denial. The less time you have to develop new skills that are going to be valuable elsewhere. So
In other words,
I
get
think
on with it.
people, you need to embrace this change that's coming. And in particular, I think if you're working in a part of project management where the practices haven't changed for decades, that's probably an area that is ripe for change,
Yes.
because it may well be that those practices are aren't necessarily data driven. Coming back to my experimentation piece earlier, if they're based on documented approaches that aren't necessarily proven at scale, I think those are the areas of project management are most at risk of changing. And when I would say risk, I mean in a positive way.
Yeah, exactly. This is all to be embraced, as you said. So, come along. We can talk about this a lot more. There's still tickets available. We'll put the link on the show notes. It's also in the newsletter. So there's still time to come along. And if you're just curious, just come along. It's totally free. There's some food, there's some drink there. And we it's not a late night. We'll be wrapped up by 8, usually 8:30. So yeah, do come along. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up for the evening. We've unpacked an awful lot as usual. Again, I'd just like to thank you, Andy, so much for coming along. We do hope that you'll come along to another episode in the future. Do you have any sort of parting words?
Just get going. I mean, one of the themes we had in the Getting Started guide, James, and actually Yoshi, you were involved in that one too. There was a big debate about top down versus sort of bottom up. Or is it sort of centralized versus distributed approach to doing this? And in the end, in the Getting Started guide, we said there are different approaches, but the critical one is just to get started.
Do something.
Do something.
Yes. Very wise words. Thanks, Andy. Last thoughts from you, Yoshi?
No, just the fascinating thing that I picked up is the word AI hallucinations. It's a fascinating subject, and I think it's good and bad. But you kind of mentioned it, James, but I think that's the word that sticks in my head for a bit.
Yeah, well, we could have a whole episode on that, I think, at some point in the future. But until then, I wish everyone goodbye, and we'll be back again next week. Please don't forget to follow, and if you can leave a review, it really helps the algorithm. We all love algorithms here, but if you can help our algorithm get to the top of the podcast charts, that'd be very, very would be very greatly received. Have a good time, everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Yoshi. Thanks, listeners.